The views, ideas, and content of WellSeekers and their guests are their own opinions, and you should always seek additional professional help around any of the issues discussed here on WellSeekers.
Welcome back to WellSeekers as we continue our series we're calling the Rebuild Lab, helping you rebuild in mind, body, spirit, and life. If you've faced a loss of any type, if you've listened to our first episode, you know that this started because of a profound loss in my own life of a person. But this series is really about more than that. It's about losing a dream and what happens when you lose. Maybe it's a job or a career or another relationship, right? There's so many ways to feel like you've hit rock bottom. And when you do, how do you rebuild, right? One of the things I shared in the first episode is I thought I knew how to do this. Not only if you know some about my background, I started in music and then was in journalism and have wanted to merge mental health and media, and got licensed as a therapist, and I'm now getting my doctorate at UPenn. So this is something that I've experience in, right? Not just personal experience, but professional experience, and I still manage to be lost in my journey, right? So if you are in the process of rebuilding something, whether you lost something or whether you just never had it to begin with, right? Like and you're trying to rebuild this dream for yourself. How do you take care of your mind, your body, and your spirit? And you may have heard me say in one of the previous episodes, over 85% of the information you find online is not real. It is literally made up or inaccurate. And so we hope to be a space where we can have real conversations, share real things about us, and have real experts share as well. One of the things I like to do is before our guest comes on, just talk a little bit about what we're going to be, what the topic is, and any sort of research on it or experience I have on it. And Jameson Arasi is going to be joining us today, sharing his personal experience with grief, an incredibly impactful story. People that have listened to the show know that grief is something that I've experienced through my life, as many of you have as well. I've loved reading your stories when you have reached out to me in the past around grief. Um, but one of the things that drew me to Jameson was his social media when I was going through loss, like just reading about his own experience with loss and how stories do impact our process and journey. And him sharing his personal experience helped me process my own. There's a book that I really love. It's called Tuesdays with Maurice, and even that used to be like reading about grief used to help me a lot, and one of the lines in that book says, "Death ends a life, not a relationship." And that line alone has been something I've carried with me through my whole life, right? Because if you lose something, it doesn't mean or you lose a person, doesn't mean the relationship's over, that can still continue. And Jameson's words hit me like that. So he's gonna be coming on talking about grief. How do you rebuild after grief? How do you process grief? Before we get to that, I did just wanna share a little bit about some of the more, like, evidence-based studies of what happens to you when you're grieving. Because in our culture, specifically here in the US, that's where I'm based. If you're listening abroad, um, we have a lot of people listening in Europe, so just wanna say hi to everyone there. But I think I mean, I am European, my family's from Italy, so shout out to everybody in Europe. But, one of the things in the US is that I feel like when people lose people, no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to ask you about it. I mean, I don't know. A lot of people don't want to share about it, right? But there is a lot that happens to our minds and our bodies and our spirits when you do lose someone. Evidence based, actual research studies showing that um, when you lose someone, some of the things that happened in your mind is there actually is your brain goes into a specific state of overdrive to adapt and try to understand this new environment. And when your mind tries to imagine creating your neurons fire, and every day, 95% of the stories that your brain are saying and telling yourself are the same. And now, if someone passes away, that story has to alter like that, right? Oftentimes when it's quick, that's more of a shock to the system because it's like your neurons are firing and this person, "Okay, I need to call this person." It's like, "No, I don't need to call this person." So neurologically, you're having to recreate your whole neurological environment, right? That takes a lot of energy. So your brain goes into overdrive trying to adapt to this new environment, this new story when it's been functioning in the same way over and over and over again, thinking the same thoughts. And that's why when people are in your day to day, it's harder, right? Because your neurons are like, well, now I do this. Well, no, now you don't do this. Okay, now we need to change and adapt. Like that's exhausting saying it. Imagine your mind going through it. So when that happens, what's going to happen to your body? Your body gets affected too. And that's why when you're going through grief, there was a study on how your immune system is actually suppressed during the grieving process, making you more vulnerable to infections. So if you are grieving and you find yourself getting sick more, that's not in your head. It's actually a physical response to all the adapting your body's doing. There was another study talking about how inflammation increases. So during grief, you can have increased inflammation. So if you find yourself having more body aches and things like that, it's totally possible it is from the grieving process. There's more cardiovascular strain during the grieving process. So your blood pressure can increase. And in some cases, grief can actually trigger something called broken heart syndrome, which you may have heard of, which means you have a heart attack and it's heart attack like, or sorry, excuse me, heart attack like symptoms because of the blood pressure increase, because the thought and the new existence, the new environment is just too much for you to handle and process. Your blood pressure increases. You have heart attack like symptoms. That's why you've probably heard people died of a broken heart. That's what's actually happening. That's the physical impact of what grief can actually do. Obviously, sleep disturbances, digestive disturbances as well. I think the other thing we don't talk a lot about in our culture is the spiritual aspect of it. So when someone dies, there's that existential questioning, right? Like, what is life about? What is the meaning of life sometimes? Some people experience something, spiritual distress, like, why did God do this, right? These are big, big things that can happen. And I think it's one of the reasons we don't talk about grief is because it does contain so many aspects to it. Um, so in this episode, we hope to touch on at least a bit of this, right? Uh, the mind, the body, and especially the spirit, with Jameson sharing his story about the loss of his brother, because that's one of the things that his site really did. His social site that I followed on Instagram was talk about that. Like, what is the emotional experience with and that spiritual experience, the spirit experience of losing somebody, and how does that impact us? So we're incredibly excited to have Jameson come on and continue this conversation. And as always, if you have questions or want to give us any feedback, my socials, the show's socials are all below. So feel free to reach out, DM me at Lucia Naz at WellSeekers. We are here for you, and we are excited to have Jameson on in just a second here at WellSeekers. And we're back on Well Seekers with our guest, Jameson Arasi. He is a writer and very meaningful content creator. Jameson, thanks so much for joining us today on Well Seekers.
Hey, Lucia, thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate this opportunity.
We were just chatting briefly before about how important this conversation is and how needed it is in today's environment. For people that aren't familiar with your platform, we did talk about it a little bit before you came on. But can you share about your journey, um, about what happened with your brother and then how it brought you to where you are today in the content that you create and share online?
Yeah, it's funny. 18, now 19 months ago, I made a post about the anniversary of my brother's passing. But in November of 2022, Thanksgiving, November 26th, unfortunately, my brother took his own life. There was no signs. You always think, oh, what did we miss? Or if that happens and you read about it or you hear about it, that the signs must be obvious. And, how could families and close friends, and especially me, my brother, my best friend, um, how could you allow this to happen? You know, there had to be. And that's the hardest lesson that I've learned in my life is sometimes it's easy to spot someone struggling. Other times you wouldn't even know. And people can hide a lot. You never really know what's going on in somebody's mind, even if they're your closest friend or partner or family member, you know? Um, so we had all gathered at my parents' house for Thanksgiving. My sisters, I have a younger sister and an older sister, and my brother, the four of us, Jacqueline, Jeffrey, Jameson, and Julie. My parents have been married for almost 50 years, very close family. We were celebrating, we were all going to have the family at my parents' house. My brother is a chef, was a chef, has always been a chef, and he was going to cook that weekend. Um, my sisters both have children, my nieces and nephews. So it was all, a weekend full of, full stomachs, full hearts, laughter, and everything was normal, you know. I went back to working in the restaurant industry. I got into hospitality because my brother's a chef, and we had working towards a dream together. Um, have opened a place in the past, but we were working at separate locations. I had to go back to New York City on Friday night of Thanksgiving weekend and to work on Saturday. You know, I had taken off on the holiday, so you got to get back and let other people have the rest of the holiday weekend. So I left and went back to the city on Saturday night. Excuse me, Friday night. And then at 3:23 p.m. on Saturday, I'll never forget it. I got a text from my father. I was running around a busy Saturday brunch in New York City at the restaurant I was overseeing at the time. And I got a text from my father that said, "Hey, please call me ASAP. I need to speak with you. I have horrible news to share." So me thinking it's a grandparent, my grandma was 90 at the time. I'm like, ah, I go and back into the office and call my dad, and he told me that my brother, had taken his own life. Um, it's something that anyone who has experienced any type of loss will never forget where you were, what you were doing, who let you know, um, especially unexpected, sudden, blindsided, all of that, those losses, you'll never forget that. And I'll never forget that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no, so true. I think I shared with you via email before. I've had a tremendous amount of loss, but my brother also actually passed away. He actually disappeared and has never been found. But I do remember the call when when they called to say he was missing because he was on a trip with other kids. And you remember like the feeling, the smells, the temperature. I remember the temperature of the day, right? There's just so much that happens in that moment.
It splits your life into two. You look back, that is the before and an after forever. For the rest of my life, that will be, people say there's no timeline in grief. I think there is in regards to a before and after, not about healing, but there is a timeline. And I made a post about this. Anyone who has experienced life altering loss knows that their life is before it happened and after it happened. There's no in between.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one of the things I really appreciate about your posts, and we're going to have all your links so that people can follow you if they don't already, is how accurately you talk about grief. I am licensed as a therapist. I have those credentials, right? And I study and have taught courses on grief. The way that you just capture your experience, but also just the clinical rightness, right, correctness that you put in your post. And I know you're not a clinician, but there is that split. There's that fragmentation of life before, life after, and creating a new life after such significant loss. And I'm wondering if that's been your experience and how that's happened for you the last 18 months.
I am not a doctor. I always claim I make sure people know I have no medical background. I'm not an expert by any means. I've used this platform. I'm just a loved one left behind, as I say. I didn't, I didn't choose this. I had no say in it. Um, but I also I'm not going to make posts and make these outrageous claims or, you know, seek attention or shock or, that's just not when I made that a year later, I made a post, um, for the anniversary of my brother's passing. And I was all worried. Prior to that, I used Instagram, photos, family, fun stuff that I was, just documenting. It's as what regular normal people use Instagram for. And I was worried. I'm like, you know what? The anniversary was rapidly approaching, and I'm like, I got to make a post. I have to do something, but I also, and you'll appreciate this, I don't want to reopen that wound again. And and then a year later have, oh my God, I'm so sorry for your loss, and then stir all of that up again. So I said, how can I make a message that is important? How can I honor my brother, but also leave, a takeaway for others, and it's, I can read it for you, but the point is, it's like, I'm not a medical doctor. I don't claim to be one. But if I do post something that is going to, I like to have I read a lot. So I like to have psychological, the psychology behind it to reinforce it. And then also explain a complex idea in a way that people can understand rather than it's like you said, it's not clinical. This is real experience. And it means, I'm not saying it means more, but it's more well received and better received sometimes when it's from just a normal guy like myself, rather than a psychologist or a best-selling author trying to, um, educate and inform and, because people are resistant to that sometimes. It's like because they feel like they're being diagnosed. But if I do make claims, and I personally, because these posts help me too, and we'll talk about that, So if it helps me, how can I write? And I have a journalism background. Before I got into hospitality, I was a writer. I was always going to be. I was actually a sports writer for Major League Baseball's website out of college. I was going to be the next Mike Lupica for the Daily News here, and before getting into hospitality to work with my brother. But I can take an idea or a concept and portray, and I take pride in presenting the material in a way that people can understand it, that they can relate to it, that there's a takeaway for not just the people that have experienced that devastation, but anyone that reads it. It offers perspective, it offers empathy, it offers humanity. And just, wow, okay, now that's why this person is acting out in school or very, resistant, or maybe they just lost their dad 2 months ago. Like, maybe, what? Grief, maybe they're gonna grieve for a long time. It's not just, getting over the flu. So I never set or intended to start sharing my life as an open my private diary publicly online. Um, but I made this post, and I'll read it now. It was on the anniversary, the 1 year anniversary of my brother's passing. Um, I wanted there to be a takeaway, a message, and I had recently was on a flight and scrolling through Instagram, and I saw there's a Norwich soccer club mental health campaign, and I saw a video, and it's a 3-minute video. I highly recommend. It's the most powerful 3-minute video I've ever watched in my.
I know the one you're talking about, so we'll link to it. Yeah.
So I saw that, and I'll never forget. I was on a plane, and I'm in public, and I start crying. Not that I care, but I just start, oh my God, because I saw myself in that video. So I get back, and I'm trying to figure out, what am I going to post? Um, I went for a run that day, which I normally do to kind of clear my head. And because you want, anniversaries are special. They're
Mhm.
heavy, but I have to honor my brother. This is the first anniversary. What am I going to do? But I don't want to reopen the wound. So I remember going for a run, just being like, boom, that's it. Just, that's the message. I have the videos of that Norwich post.
Mhm.
I go, I have the videos leading up to that. So I shared and I wrote 365 days ago, my family and I went to sleep with full hearts and full stomachs after an amazing Thanksgiving weekend together. The next day, our world changed forever. I debated for a very long time whether or not to share these personal videos. These are the last videos of my brother. 16 hours later, he took his own life. I'm not posting this for sympathy or attention. Instead, my hope is that you will share this video and this important message. My hope is that you will pick up your phone, call and text those close to you, and simply check in. See how they're doing. Ask how they're really doing. Life is hard. People struggle. Sometimes it's easy to spot, but many times you'd never even know. So do me a favor, grab your phone, send a text, make a call. You may be glad you did. The video, it's showing my brother that Thanksgiving weekend of smiles and laughter and joy, never knowing that he had in his mind made peace with this is how he was going to say goodbye. And, it just, I posted that video and it went viral. And for lack of a better phrase, and I quickly realized I was like, wow, okay, so many other people are relating and are resonating. And I go, just by one post, I go, what if I start sharing, my navigating life after loss? So then I started one post, next post, and you realize the conversation is desperately needed. And I hate that I'm not brave enough to share. This is my life. And like, I am confident in who I am and what I'm about. And I think grief also, um, changes everything, your priorities, your perspective about everything. And I'm sharing my life that can help other people. If my vulnerability is the price of helping others, it's always worth it. And if someone is going to criticize me for that, I honestly don't care.
Yeah.
They have other issues.
What are some of the things in retrospect if someone has a loved one that may be struggling that you perhaps noticed or anything that you may say to people? Because suicide is right. It's real. It's complicated. It's people that you don't think because it can be masked, right? So is there something that you've learned in that aspect of the experience that you'd like to share?
I
And if
think
not, it's okay. I know I just sort of
no,
gave that
yeah.
to you, but
No, I just did actually had a partnership with BetterHelp for Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and the importance. It's a huge, obviously, it's near and dear to me. Um, and it's just raising awareness because it's people, like I said earlier, people can hide a tremendous amount and and they can. And, you always, like I said, you always say, like, how did they miss that? Trust me, we missed it. My family is very tightly knit. We all had our ups and downs, but we never thought that this would be an option or an end result, And so I think that in 2025, especially men, the strong people, don't take someone's word for it. If you feel something, if you think somebody is off, or if they're in a rut, Adam Grant, I read his books all the time as a psychologist. It's, you know, exercise on the side of awkwardness and uncomfortableness rather than the alternative. I'd rather trust me, I'd rather pry. And it's not invasion. If you do it in a way that's delicate, that's gentle, compassionate, you're not prying. You're, hey, what's up? Is everything okay? Don't attack, but do it in a way where you can offer, hey, what's been hard lately? Tell me what's been hard lately, not how are you? How are you is I'm good. See you later. Open the door and extend. If I hear what's been hard lately, it changes everything. Because now I know that person doesn't just want to hear the rainbows and butterflies. Like maybe I could talk about the crap. It doesn't mean I will, but it gives an opportunity, and so for the signs you miss or whatever, hindsight, regret will eat you. It will for me because regret has you replaying moments in your life that you weren't even a part of. And I do it all the time. I wasn't even there, and but asking life is hard. People struggle, as I said. It's just listening, observing. If you have a gut feeling, it doesn't hurt to ask, check, make sure they're doing okay. Don't take their word for it because it could mean everything to that person.
Yeah, absolutely, and beautifully said. I always like to ask, "Are you okay?" instead of, "How are you doing?" Right? Because it's more, "How are you doing?" People will just say, "Fine," and move on, and I love the writing you mentioned as well, and asking people, right, "What's going on today?" Because that does sort of, offer a different lens to the conversation, but and people may not always take you up on it, right? But it's just that different approach or a more nuanced approach. Um, when you started to move past, and I know that we haven't talked about this, but I'm gonna sort of pull the curtain back. I sent you questions before, which
Sure. Yeah.
and one of the questions
Yeah.
I asked, and I was thinking about it, having lost so many people as well, was about, how do you get through the first few days? And I don't know if you experienced this, but it feels like the first month is easy to get through because you're almost in such a haze and you're surrounded by people and everyone wants to help, right? Which is beautiful and appropriate. But it's almost when that goes away and the quiet starts to set in and the day to day starts to set in, that in my experience, that's when things got real throughout all the losses that I've experienced in life. Was that your experience? And if it was, what got you through that period when things started getting real?
I couldn't agree with you more, especially early on, after that devastation wears off, and James Patterson is one of my favorite quotes about the weird thing about devastating loss is that life actually goes on. When you're faced with a tragedy, loss so huge that you have no idea how you can live through it, somehow the world keeps turning, the seconds keep ticking. There's resentment early. How you're getting your coffee, you're going to work, you're walking your dog. Don't you know my brother died? And it's like you're in this because the world looks the same. Everything looks familiar, but for me, it's never going to be it's different. It's never gonna be the same, and you try to grasp that. Then you get back into routine, but you have your friends, your family, the support around you, going to work, back into kinda normal life. But I lived alone, in New York City, and so it would your grief is always gonna be waiting for you. So, it usually is in the quiet times where the distractions fade, and I would get home and it would just I gotta go running. I gotta do something because I can't it's too heavy to sit with. Um, so I was in therapy right away, which helped me tremendously. I didn't know why I needed it. It was kind of the triage, but I also knew that long term, this is going to affect me in the immediate, but also in relationships or in my family dynamic, how personally on a level much bigger that I've ever experienced. I like to do things. I'm a independent person, but I knew that I needed someone to hold my hand and guide me and navigate. Um, so I was in therapy right away to process this, but it goes on to, uh, where I remember you have these huge, crazy therapy sessions, heavy, and then it's time's up. You gotta go right back to work, and it's like, what do I was feeling that I was stalling there, like, in my healing, so I made a decision, I knew I needed to go away, and I went to, um, by myself, and since then, I've gone on multiple solo trips. It just allows you, without distraction, if you with no itinerary, no agenda, to sit with it, without interruption, if you commit to it. I'm not talking about going away and, you're on your phone the whole time and you just are in a different zip code. But I went to Costa Rica for 2 weeks and knew that I needed to sit and laugh and cry and because to your point, your original question, no matter how much time was going on, I was going through the motions, I still in the back of my mind was like, "Is this real?" I fully hadn't accepted, and you have to convince yourself, at times, like, did that happen? And you're not crazy. It's just your brain has been hardwired for that bond, and you have to rewire your entire neurological system. So it's like I knew that I needed to go and disconnect, the ultimate do not disturb. And the intention of my trip was to go process and fully accept the finality of it. And this was 5 months after my brother passed. And the best thing I tell people is, again, everybody's different. But for me, it was that trip I went with the intention of accepting the finality, but I returned with something I never thought, and it was hope. It was peace with the events that transpired. I can't go channel all my energy, what if, to reverse the outcome. No matter what, it's done. And how do I move forward and live a meaningful life, and I came back with hope that I could do that, and in a way that, would honor my brother and take the best of what he taught me, and not always dwell on tragedy, you know what I'm saying? And it's hard. It's easier said than done, but, that's a step where, wow, I can this is where the real healing begins, this is with me forever. I accepted the finality, but I can still live a meaningful life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And grief is not linear. And it's not even stage. I don't know. You probably know this, Jameson, but the stages of grief was actually developed for patients, not people left.
End of
Yeah.
life, end of life,
Mhm.
yeah.
And so we
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, yeah.
exactly.
I wrote about that because it was her observations on end of life and people dying, not how we're supposed to heal.
Absolutely. And so when you came back from Costa Rica, what were some of those rebuilding blocks or building blocks that led you into this new life without your brother?
Life is short. Um, it changes your priorities and perspective overnight. Grief, loss, it shows how fragile life is. Stop wasting time. Tell people how you feel. I came back, and my brother and I were in hospitality together. The goal was to open a restaurant together. That was our dream. And I came back from Costa Rica and knew that I needed a change. I can't go to work every day with the constant reminders. In hospitality, you have to be friendly and hospitable and want to take care of people. And we were really good at that, but if my brother is out of the equation, there was almost a resentment of, I don't care anymore. So it would be a disservice to still lead my team as a director of operations and being that person if I selfishly I didn't want to do it anymore. So I knew a change was in order, and I left I gave 3 months notice and left my job and realized you can make tons of money or be present and spend time with family and work remotely and not miss things. In hospitality, you work nights, weekends, holidays. It's what we sign up for. It's part of the gig, and we did that for 16 years. But grief will rip the rug from beneath your feet and let you know what? Don't wait. Um, Today is tomorrow's not guaranteed. You can't change the past. No one can predict the future. All you have is that present moment and who you choose to spend time with and where you choose to be. Um, there's power in that. And or you can live a life of regret. Again, I'm not saying it's for everybody, quit your job and do that, but it just have those honest conversations with yourself and check in daily. I do. What's really heavy today, what's been heavy lately, um, what's ideal for me, and what's getting in the way of that. And then some days you'll have the answers, and other days you won't, but you still check in uh, and listen to yourself, because that'll tell you everything about where you are in regards to healing, you know, in regards to where you are in your grief. You're not, if you have a meltdown, it's okay. you know.
I know that you built a community online. How has that helped you get through the grief? Because it does feel like one of those foundational sort of pieces in your rebuilding.
Yeah, it's funny because I made a post for the second year anniversary. Um, and I wrote, you know, so many people have a year, 18 months ago, it was a year ago, of sharing, building this online community, virtual support group, literally in the comment section. It's a beautiful thing of just a safe space for people to share their stories of love and loss with other people that know what it's what it's like. And um, it for me, I take pride in being able, as I said earlier, to write something, showcase something that has impacted me, a quote or an experience, um, and have it relatable to other people. But every time, and working with my therapist, people are like, "Oh, you're going to continue to post this, and aren't you going to be stuck in your grief?" And for me, it's not. I'm a writer. This is how I process every post that I go to make. I am channeling, and selfishly, it helps me more, because I'm processing my pain. I'm processing what I'm feeling. Um, and it also allows me to spend time with my brother the only way that I can now, and it's a win-win, So, um, building that community, that trust, I take pride in it because you're not you're connecting emotionally. And that's why I went from 8,000 followers to 118,000. And not to brag, it's just to show that people are not only viewing, millions of views on content, but they are be connecting emotionally and being touched to not only view but follow, stick around. And there's value in that, and I take such a tremendous pride in that, you know, people are like, "Wow, this guy helped me." And then but no, I you helped me by allowing me to create this platform, and it's grown to something I never in a million years could have imagined. It's something that I don't, take for granted. I don't post just to post. There has to be a message. It's never self-serving. I don't need attention. We're talking about a heavy, heavy topic. I don't want it to always be heavy, but sometimes, a lot of times, it's laughter, it's fun, it's a mix. But we're not, it's not a comedy. There's no comic relief, where or we're not selling clothing or, this is somebody going through a rough time that your words could be exactly what they need to hear in that moment. And it's very, very special. The thousands of messages I get, it's just it's crazy, because when someone tells me they found strength or comfort in something that I've shared, that honors the life my brother lived. And and that's everything, and that's the driving force behind that. It's like, how do you turn this pain into a purpose that's not a victim or constant complaining? You know what I'm saying? And everyone will experience grief. No one's immune to grief. So everyone at some point will experience some form of grief in their life. So we should talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, 2 things that stood out. One is that we don't have the conversation a lot about grief, and I think that there's lots of reasons for it. I think as a society, right? Because if we look at different cultures and how they handle grief, and again, this is just one of the areas that's studied, and personally, I have a lot of experience, but there's such different ways other cultures handle grief, and it feels like here in the States especially, it's more like no one knows how to talk about it, nobody wants to talk about it. It's almost like don't ask them about it because they don't wanna make people uncomfortable instead of like, let's just get this out in the open and have this conversation. That grief is a lot of things, it's complex, it's messy, It sometimes is laughter. It sometimes is making jokes, right? Like, that is how sometimes people process, right? And it can go dark, right? I know with my family, with my brother, it would be like, "Oh, where is it?" Right? Like, we can't find him, right? Just to make some sort of humor about the fact that something so tragic has happened, right? And not to say that that's how everyone processes, but there isn't really anything off limits with grief. That's what I like to say to people because it is complex and messy and sad and happy and every emotion you're ever going to feel. But it's hard to have that conversation because we're not taught how to be a little bit messy, I think, as a
It
society.
and it you know we no one's prepared for it until it shows up unexpectedly at their door, and then you're in panic mode, so and there's so many, like you said before, there's so many different layers of grief, and it's not just death, it's, I've learned and read non-finite grief, your imagined future, the life you imagine, whether my brother and I, you grieve the death, of course, but all of the hopes and dreams and plans, the life that I thought it was gonna live, you grieve that part too, and even for, a couple, a divorce is a form of grief, there's so many different layers of grief that, um, we experience, on a human level that people don't wanna talk about, and it's like it's almost like it it's a part of the human condition, so everyone is going to experience it.
Mhm. No,
We should talk about it.
absolutely. Just a couple more questions because I want to respect your time too. But if someone is stuck
No,
or
sure.
feeling stuck in their grief and not really sure how to start rebuilding, what advice would you offer them?
So, I wrote this quote that I think it captures this very, very well, and it puts everything in perspective. I wrote this and it took off, on Instagram. And we don't get to choose the storm, but we do get to choose what comes next, how we go on, how we heal, how we live. Maybe that's what the storm is all about, not just surviving, but who we become in the aftermath. You Many of us, we didn't have a say in our fate. We didn't have, and it's unfair, and there's a lot of anger and resentment that, trust me, I felt it all. Why me? Poor me. I'll never play the victim. That's just not my personality. Um, but those are justified feelings, but okay, once you accept that storm, that shows, how you choose to go forward is a choice. Healing is a choice. You can stay stuck, you can stay miserable as long as you want, or you can choose to honor that person, seek the support and the help you need. I get a lot of people that comment on posts that I say, on this post particularly about the storm. Well, yeah, but blah 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 blah, and they always have excuses. And I say, okay, but what are you doing? Are you seeking the support? Are you reaching out to a therapist? Have you gone to therapy? Are you being proactive in your healing? Or are you just choosing to stay stuck? Now, again, this is after time has passed. I'm not talking about early on in your grief, because if you are, oh, I lost my husband 10 years ago, life sucks. Like, okay, okay, but what are you doing? Are you, is there a support group? Are you reaching out to people that could help you in a way to renew some sort of purpose and, and still change perspective in regards to how you view life? How can I honor the loved one? How can I still live a meaningful life, carry everything that I loved about them? And that's why I hate that quote that says, grief is love with no place to go. No, I can channel that love, energy, everything into my family, my nieces and nephews, strangers, and just, interactions, and use that love uh to help others, and I think when if they feel stuck, the best thing for me was understanding that grief is forever. There's two things you need to accept. It's grief is forever, um, and I'll never get over it. Once you understand those two things, that you'll never get over it and it's forever, a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. I have forever to figure it out. There's no rush or no timeline, no, oh man, I should be better by now. It's been a year. It's been a year and a half. If you make peace with the fact that it is going to be your companion, it's going to ride shotgun with you, it's going to show up loud on some days, in the background on others, but it's going to be with you forever, and that you're never going to get over that loss. It allows you to take it day by day, and work through on a smaller scale and realize that like you said, there's no linear path and no step-by-step
Yeah, and I
manual.
think that
Everybody's
we
different.
need to define and get over, right? Because that's just too broad of terminology when it comes to grief, right? And rebuilding when it comes to grief. Because that relationship and those experiences and those things that you're going to miss, those will, right? That could be something that always exists. And you can hold 2 things at once, right? You can hold your new life, your new experiences, your new relationships, your new loves, right? Your new happiness. I remember laughing for the first time and feeling like I shouldn't be laughing, I should still be sad, right? Like,
Same.
yeah, and because if I laugh, I'm not honoring that this person is no longer here, right? And but 2 things can exist at once. You can move forward and rebuild and still be sad, still miss, still long for, right? All of those complex emotions. Um,
Yeah, I called it happiness guilt,
yeah,
initially.
yeah,
And then you understand that grief and joy can coexist, and they're just love in different forms, and it's, you know, by numbing one and avoiding one, you diffuse the other, and I think for me, it increased my capacity for joy and what's in front of me and my family and the love there, and it's two sides of the same coin, it's just different ways, you have to just remind yourself what the grief represents. You wouldn't trade that love and the relationship for the pain that you feel now, and um it's a part of the deal. It's a package, that's the deeper the grief, the deeper the love, I mean, all the cliches, there are cliches for a reason.
yeah. No, absolutely. Jameson, one of the things we've been asking everyone in this series is what's one thing, maybe more technology based, maybe it's an app, maybe it's right, a person that you follow and appreciate. And then one thing that's more back to basics, whether it's rest or hydration, that's got you through this experience. What are the 2 tools in moderns versus going back to basics?
I think for me, I've always been an active person. So, movement is medicine. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to train for a marathon. Just you can do some sort of go for a walk. It allows you to kind of check in, and some days you'll think about some heavier stuff. Some days you'll laugh. I think, like you said, following people on Instagram that add value to your or perspective, understanding too the psychology behind grief. And you don't have to be an expert, but understand, like, why is grief so exhausting, and just learning and reading and researching that, it doesn't it just makes you awareness can make you be like, you know what, I'm not crazy, I'm not failing, something's not wrong with me. um it still can suck, but you can, understand, you know what, I'm not the outlier experiencing this. Um, and then you said the other.
No, I think you answered it. So it sounds like running and movement is your back to basic, and then following people on social media that actually add instead of detract, right, from the conversation.
Yeah.
Any final words, Jameson, before we let you go?
No, I think, you know, it's grief will change everything. It'll change your world, it'll change your perspective and your priorities. And everybody will experience it at some point in their life in some form. Um, it will allow you to, just be kind to other people. You never know who's literally, holding it on by a thread. You could be standing next to somebody on the subway. Everybody's going through some stuff. Just kindness, a moment of kindness can stay with somebody for days, and it could be just what that person needs. Check in with people that you care about, as we started the conversation with, if you have a gut feeling or something doesn't feel right, you're not going to be the bad guy for caring too much, as long as like we said, you do it in a way that's respectful, delicate, showing genuine, real concern that you care. And it's all about phrasing. Don't accuse, inquire, and just kind of allow them the opportunity to tell you. And sometimes don't take their word for it. Just go to another friend that's or family member of theirs and just say, "Hey, have you talked to so and so lately?" Because like I said before, there's a lot of people are struggling now more than any time before with mental health and um depression and a lot of mental health struggles. So just being compassionate, caring for one another, and just being kind.
Jameson, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your experience. We'll be right back on Well Seekers.
Thank you so much, Lucia.
Welcome back, and thank you again so much to Jameson Arasi for joining us and sharing his experience. It was incredibly powerful to hear his story, so hope you all resonated with it as well. Before we let you go, if you're new to the show or you're just listening to this episode, we'd like to give 2 tools. One that's more digital based and one that's more offline to help you in your processing in your journey. Today's episode is obviously about grief. And so I just wanted to share a couple tools. One is an app. If you're listening online, I always hold up my phone. Um, I don't know if you can see that. Yes, just so you can see the icon, but we'll put the links below. It's called the Untangle Grief Support app. It's something that I have used, and this isn't the end all be all, just another tool for your toolbox. Some people love this app, some people do not like this app. So take it or leave any of the suggestions here at Well Seekers. But basically, what this does, I'm just going to read the description because it's beautiful. It says, Untangle holds your hand through all the emotional and logistical challenges that come after bereavement, making it easier to rebuild your life. And I just got goosebumps because that is essentially what it does do. It has all the necessary components and it does hold your hand and walk you through the complicated layers of grief, and the complicated aspects of grief. So if you are grieving and I'm going to be honest, I think these aspects aren't just for losing a person. You could even do it for losing a relationship. There are like specific things around like young grievers and cancer loss, but loss in general, like some of the things in here are just great for if you're rebuilding your life, but specifically for grief offline. I know that I've said it before, but I just think grief support groups are underrated. If you look up, literally like throw into Chat GPT or just throw in grief support groups to Google, there are phenomenal community supports that are underutilized. And some people love apps because that's a community that I just shared, but some people really like the real life experience. I use both. I think we can't underestimate the power of real life community. It's where I've formed my most important relationships. And there's just so much power in that. So if you're not an online person, my tool suggestion is a community support group. I've been to one before in the past, many years ago, but it was impactful then, and I know people that go now, and they're just as impactful. So those are our 2. Again, just if you wanna add something to your toolbox, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Jameson Arasi, thank you so much for joining the show, and thank you to everyone listening. We love having you be a part of our family, and we are so grateful to be a part of yours, and we'll be back soon on Well Seekers.